A lot of people are curious whether meditation can actually help them sleep. And the good news is that the answer is absolutely yes. So what I'd like to do is share a couple of different practices with you. One to help you sort of get prepped for sleep, and the second to actually help you fall asleep. So let's start by understanding what are the things that keep us from sleeping. If we think about when we wake up in the morning, most people are lucky enough to feel pretty refreshed. And as we go on throughout the day, we tend to have small experiences that sort of have some emotional energy with them. Either I'll have an interaction at work, or I'll get stuck in traffic, or my food isn't quite exactly what I ordered. There are all kinds of experiences that we can have that sort of mentally disturb the mind a little bit. And by the end of the day, sometimes we're super wound up. And if we look at people who have trouble falling asleep, their mind tends to get stuck on particular events, and they may replay thoughts in their head over and over and over again. So the things that keep us from falling asleep are actually pent-up emotional experiences throughout this day or even days before. So if we can discover a specific way to unwind our mind, to let go of those individual emotions, then our mind won't be caught up on them and will actually let us go to sleep. So what I'd like to teach y'all today is a meditative rewind practice. Essentially, what we want to do is rewind our mind. So we're going to start with actually right where we are at this point in time, right before bed, and we're going to go backwards through our day, letting go of each emotional experience that we can recall. And so what I want y'all to do is kind of start in the present when you're kind of laying in bed, and go through each event that happened prior to bed, and try to be as minute as possible. So before you got into bed, you changed into pajamas. Before you changed into pajamas, you brushed your teeth, and it was a little bit irritating because your roommate never closes the cap, and there's all this crusty toothpaste on the edge of the tube, and so that was kind of annoying. And so acknowledge that emotion and then kind of move backward. Before I brushed my teeth, I used the bathroom, and that was a little bit annoying too because I was out of toilet paper, and that was really frustrating. And so acknowledge that frustration and then move earlier. And so in that way, you can kind of think about having dinner before and how much you enjoyed the meal because you got to catch up with a friend and wasn't that really nice. And before that, you were a little bit nervous because you were supposed to meet them at this restaurant, but they weren't answering their texts, and you were wondering whether they were going to show up or not. So that was a little bit frustrating, and so on and so forth. Go through each moment of your day, and you can even get very, very narrow if you want to, and sort of go through not only just meeting at a restaurant, but first you got into your car, then you drove, then you took a left turn, then you had to find parking, you looped around once, you finally found parking. You can kind of go as minute as you want to. And you want the whole practice to take maybe about 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And the key thing is, as you go backwards throughout your day, acknowledge each emotional experience until hopefully you wind up at the first thing that happened in the day, which was when you woke up. The advantage of this practice is that, as I mentioned, we accumulate a lot of energy throughout the day. If you really think about it, there are all kinds of little things that our mind gets caught up on. And so in order to prime ourselves to fall asleep, we want to let go of all of that emotional energy. So that is the meditative rewind practice. Now, once your mind is primed to fall asleep, then we want to use a different technique to help us really fall back to sleep. And this is where, traditionally people will talk about doing things like counting sheep. And essentially what we want to do is some kind of repetitive mental exercise that keeps our mind on one place, and then eventually sleep will claim us. So the good news is that you can probably use just about any technique that we teach you to help you fall asleep. But I'm going to give you guys a really simple one, which is to start at 100 and try to count back to 1. And this may seem very, very simple, but we're going to complicate it a little bit. Because the key thing here is that you should wait before you kind of count down to the next number. And people are kind of wondering, how long should I wait? And the answer is a little bit longer than you think you should. And this is where a lot of times our minds will try to count. So we'll sort of say, should I wait 5 seconds? Let me count to 5, and then I'll go to the next number. I know it sounds kind of weird, and maybe you want to wait somewhere around 5 or 6 seconds, but don't try to count. Just say 100. And then when you're ready for the next number, wait a little bit longer, and then say 99. And when you're ready for the next number, wait a little bit longer and say 98, and so on and so forth. As slowly as you can, kind of very, very slow, but still attending to the practice. You don't want to say 100 and then wait half an hour for 99, because then your mind will start wandering in between. So you want to try to find this sweet spot, which isn't a particular amount of time, because if your mind keeps track of time, it's actually doing something else. So we want to count as slow as we can and yet keep our mind on counting. And what I found is that people who can find this sweet spot are able to actually use this technique to fall asleep. Now, some people may be wondering, what happens if I get to 1? And if you get to 1, you haven't been doing the technique right. So unfortunately, slow down a little bit and try again. So my hope is that these two techniques will be a useful introduction to how we can use meditation to help us fall asleep. The first thing to understand is that when we try to fall asleep, sometimes emotions and other kinds of energy in the mind keeps us from being able to fall asleep. And the second thing to consider is that our mind wanders a lot and gets engaged with thoughts which keep us from falling asleep. So we can actually do a particular kind of dharana or focusing practice on counting backwards to keep our mind from wandering around and at the same time be boring enough to where we fall asleep.